I think it's really admirable to learn how to do a thing and just keep perfecting it. I mean, in visual arts, like Picasso is interesting for his restless creativity and constant invention, but like someone like Agnes Martin is amazingly interesting too, who just minimizes everything down and did the same grid work. That kind of precision, that's is amazing too. I admire them all. Just certain things I can be. I can't be Agnes Martin. I can be protean and constantly evolving in my artwork. That's kind of where I go. I'm constantly curiously trying to find worlds, and I do have, like the Picasso who became, the main figure in my 20th century history book, XX, was by accident. It was like a eureka moment in that I wanted to start. I said, well, where am I going to start this book if it's really a history of kind of art culture in the 20th century? So I really want to start at the beginning of the century with the birth of modernism, which shaped art and culture throughout the 20th century, and especially the first half of the century. So I said, I've always wanted to get understand more about what was going on with Picasso and Apollinaire and Paris. So I just picked up books about that period, right again. And it turned out Picasso's life was a perfect one. Picasso came to Paris in 1900, so I was like, oh, well, that's a good start, So you can kind of see Picasso as simultaneously inventing the century in terms of art and history, and also his life kind of tracking so many of its motions up until the 1970s. So I just started reading books about that era, and my intention when I first started that project was to write one poem per voice. Like, you wouldn't get more than one poem. There'd be only one Picasso poem, one so-and-so poem. But then lo and behold, Picasso became so just deeply implanted in my brain that I just started writing lots of Picasso poems. I think there's like 10 Picasso poems end up in the book, but I wrote 20 or 30 of them. At one point I said, well, maybe I should just take this whole project, and instead of being like the 20th century, it should be like Picasso's century. All poems all about Picasso, Matisse, people who knew Picasso, overlapping here, there, this and that. And I think I could have actually made that book, but I was like, that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I got more Picasso than I bargained for. Ended up cutting a bunch out, but still there's lots in there. In part that was because I wanted there to be some sort of through lines in the narrative. And I feel like 100, that book is 100 poems long. One poem for every year of the century. So in fact, if it had been just 100 different voices, it might end up more like a fragmented collage rather than a thing that went to collage but had certain narratives and certain motions that carried through the larger process. So Picasso became one of those. You can kind of trace his life and the fact that his aesthetics begin with inventing modernism and go through so many weird evolutions. He's such a crazy character who knew everybody, had encountered everybody. But he's also a pretty detestable human being. So it wasn't any admiration I have for Picasso at all is just based on his kind of monomaniacal desire to create art and insistence on doing so. He's otherwise a pretty bad role model in every way, shape, or form.